Hey everybody, this is John with another episode of Think Culture Daily. Today I wanted to follow up on the Agamben video I just did and discuss the concept of the security state, specifically within the context of the United States. That's what I'm most familiar with, obviously. But I take this to be a kind of pan-Western development, maybe just a global development, probably so, at least to some extent. But so I want to talk about the security state today, and then tomorrow I think I'm going to talk about the idea of the biosecurity state and what that might mean, what that might look like, how it's different, etc. I think that'll be interesting. The rest of the week I might also address some of the concepts that were brought up in these essays, but I'm not quite sure. He doesn't really go into any of this stuff in depth, obviously, in the essays, and I didn't. Consequently, in my video, which would have been really long if I did, and he didn't do it in the essays anyway. But yeah, I feel like adding some context, giving some background as far as what some of this stuff means might be useful, might be interesting, and it's something that I can sort of riff on a little bit. I do want to add a caveat, though, which is that I think that there's a kind of utopianism, a kind of like hopeless optimism, a kind of naivete to Agamben's position with respect to these sorts of things, because which is not to say that I don't think one should be critical, have a critical orientation to it. I do think that's important, plus I don't accept any limitations on thought and critical inquiry, but I think that he's, I don't know, just naive. Like, we live in a society now. Like, for example, think about Virilio, right? He says that with every technological leap, with every innovation, comes the possibility of a new accident, right? So we get the airplane, and that creates the possibility of a plane crash. Creates the possibility of a hijacking, right? With a train, you get the possibility of things like a train robbery, a derailment. So that, that's the way that technology marches forward, right? When you have like digitized commerce, right? The possibility of hacking, cyber theft, etc. These things emerge. So with technological innovation, you get the possibility for kind of novel kinds of accidents, even catastrophes. We live in a world in which I don't know if you guys keep track of 3D printing stuff. I figured I'd pull this up and just kind of, as I talk, I'll just kind of go through stuff here. I don't know what to do with that. But anyway, so for example, so we live in a world in which researchers have published a new 3D bioprinting method that brings the field of tissue engineering one step closer to being able to 3D print a full-sized adult human heart. I know they did something like this in Israel. See, that's probably what this is about. In what the Israeli media is calling the world's first, scientists at Tel Aviv University have 3D printed a small heart using human tissue that includes vessels, collagen, and biological molecules, a breakthrough, according to Haaretz, that they hope could one day render organ donations obsolete. I'm sure it will. Or 3D printed guns, right? Which is going to expand, right? The possibilities with 3D printing guns and things like that is going to expand dramatically. What exists is constantly expanding. I don't know if it says anything about the history here. A 3D printed version of an M1911, I don't know anything about guns, pistol made of metal using an industrial 3D printing, right? There is no theoretical limitation as far as I know. But yeah, we live in a world in which people can, in which we're increasingly being able to, we can print, can we do this? See, a novel 3D printed virus, right? National Institute of Health. You see what I'm saying? We live in a world in which potentially, I don't even think it, potentially, inevitably, the technology will exist for a single human individual to, be able to print like a novel form of smallpox or something and release it. And the idea that you live in a world in which the destructive power of individuals is so great that they could, cause as an individual something like a pandemic, and that you don't develop, like an extensive surveillance network and, law enforcement, even like with preventive aims and stuff like that. I just think it's silly. It's really silly. Like with computers and stuff, I don't know if you guys remember this, but hacker brings down Estonian government. I don't know if you remember this sort of thing. So I think I remember something about like one guy, right? And he did a hack in Estonia. This one, right? I think like one guy basically, and he like brought the government of Estonia to its knees or something, right? Because everything is online. See, Golosakov, the cyber attack mastermind, right? Claimed it was an act of civil disobedience. But the hackers rained down a data load equivalent to downloading the entire Windows XP operating system every 6 seconds for 10 hours. Hana Bank, Estonia's largest bank and one of the prime targets of the attack, lost around $1 million over the course of the attacks. We also had in this country, right, not that long ago, it wasn't super effective, but, right, we had this. Didn't we? Am I wrong about that? Maybe it was just a threat. Oh, what's this? Let's see. How long ago was this? 2015. This isn't the one I'm thinking about. But I seem to recall that even within the last few years or something, Anonymous, the hacking group, so this is like a small group of individuals, right, brought down Wall Street, right, for like a couple minutes or something like that. I could be wrong, I guess. But you see, you catch my drift. Like when we live in a world in which an individual can like cripple a government, can cripple the financial infrastructure of whole nations, can potentially 3D print weapons in their living room that can kill thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And we're increasingly moving in the direction of that, but the technology already exists for a single person to wreak quite a lot of destruction. Even the idea, like the security state, I know I haven't really started talking about it yet, but the security state apparatus, right, really kicks into high gear with 9/11, after 9/11, right? And 9/11, again, like it shows like the frequency of air travel and the way airplanes work, all this kind of stuff. It produces the possibility of a hijacking in which a person has at their disposal a plane up in the air, like the amount of destruction you can do with that is incredible, right? So they flew it into the Twin Towers, etc. We're all familiar with that. And in a world where something like that's possible, you get the TSA, right? The TSA is one of the examples I have, but so there's that, right? So I think that it's really naive. I would want to be sort of more realpolitik about it, like the possibility of living in a world with the kind of technology that exists without having a massive surveillance system and like a network to try to catch and prevent acts of terror and all this kind of stuff. I just think there's something really silly about it, Like there are lots of people who are like, we should dismantle the CIA and stuff like that. And to some degree, again, I understand and I sympathize with the criticism of these things. Like I said, Agamben's criticism in my video of the lockdowns of the security state, the biosecurity state, etc. I sympathize with to some degree, but I certainly don't go the whole way because like dismantling the security state, dismantling the CIA and the FBI and all this kind of stuff, the consequences of that would be, tremendous. It's just the power held by individual people is way too much. They're like, we didn't need it in 1910 or whatever, right? It's because nobody could do this sort of thing. You couldn't have a guy sitting in his basement and wreck the stock exchange, right? That's what it was, I think. I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Suffers blips, see, as anonymous ticks. I could have just been wrong about the year. Exchange ground to a halt due to a technical issue. So I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But yeah, that's my point. This sort of thing didn't exist in the past. The possibility of individuals wreaking this kind of havoc didn't exist in the past. So obviously you're going to get something like the security state. Now, with that said, I think that people tend to be sort of under aware of the security state. Let me check how I'm doing here. I'm fine. I think that people tend to be sort of under aware of what happens with the security state. So there are some popular operations, right? So there's Operation Shamrock, for example. This was, I think, at the end of the World War II. Yeah, this is near the end of World War II. I think it ended in September, right? In any case, so with this, for example, the National Security, what became the NSA, it was the Armed Forces Security Agency at the time, basically looked at all messages that were incoming and outgoing, out of the U.S. and into the U.S. And at the height of Project Shamrock, 150,000 messages were printed and analyzed by the NSA personnel in a month. Right, so they were going through all of our mail. This came under fire, and it stopped. We get stuff like COINTELPRO. That's another one that people know about, right? Where this is the FBI, right? Yeah, the FBI. They were surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations and stuff. We're talking about, the KKK, the Communist Party, anti-Vietnam War protest stuff, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power, Martin Luther King Jr., Nation of It. I mean, it was pretty extensive. And even AIM and stuff. But in any case, yeah, I mean, so the FBI is undertaking this, massive surveillance program targeting, domestic entities, domestic political organizations and stuff like that. We get stuff like MKUltra, that's another famous one, I mean, we could go through a lot of these, but so for example, people talk about the executive branch and the power of the executive branch, right? What is this? Anyway, yeah, I think with this they were drugging people and stuff like that, giving people LSD or something. But in any case, yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, they're all. I mean, people don't understand the degree, the extent of the administrative bureaucracy. People talk about how the executive branch has expanded its powers, right? They talk about how power has become unaccountable, etc. Trump campaigned on draining the swamp. I think the degree to which he's not done that is sort of evidence of how powerful they are, actually. And I, to some degree, I don't think that they're stoppable. So we have I think the TSA is a really good example, right? So after 9/11, we realized that something like that was possible. It was a vulnerability, right? It's a risk, and I think all of this, the idea of the security state is about managing risk, right? And they engage in projections. They, as I talked about in the Agamben video, very briefly, they operate according to a kind of logic of the worst, because they have to anticipate and nip in the bud, all these problems, right? They have to anticipate problems and then solve them before they happen. And like the saying goes, we have to be right. We have to stop the terrorists 100% of the time, they've only got to like be successful once, right? And I think the logic sort of is like that. Like even like if you're thinking about presidents and their incentives and stuff, like if we had a kind of 9/11 event under Trump or under Biden or whatever, like that ruins your administration. It ruins your legacy. It's perceived as an enormous failure, like you failed as a president, you know. And I mean it's also catastrophic, and the human toll is potentially catastrophic. It could be way worse than that, you know. So they anticipate, you know, they calculate risks, they anticipate potential crises, etc., and they try to manage risks such that, and thinking of possible worst case scenarios and stuff like that, make sure you would maintain security in the case of worst case scenarios, right? So this whole administrative bureaucracy has emerged. It's accelerated in the wake of 9/11. You get things like the Patriot Act, etc. You get things like the TSA, which I was saying I think is a pretty good example. But yeah, people don't understand, like, in my mind, sovereignty is primarily possessed in this country by the administrative bureaucracy, by what one might call the security state, and that's why we talk about state of exception and stuff in terms of Agamben, right? Because they operate in a manner that's sort of unaccountable. We don't know who these people are. You know, they're coming up with and enacting policies that go through no sort of democratic deliberation, and yeah, they're just imposed, right? They're just imposed according to this. Like an agency is created, like the TSA, and this created in the wake of 9/11, and they're created, and then they just have the authority to manage risks associated with the possibility of something like a terrorist attack. And again, Agamben was talking about terrorism as a major reason for the development of the security state. So you get something like the TSA, they're trying to prevent a kind of repeat 9/11, and they just start implementing controls, right? Like they do full body scans now. That wasn't a law. Congress didn't pass like everyone that flies in this country is going to have to go through a body scanner or something like that, right? It's not democratic at all. No one knows who is coming up with this stuff and who's implementing it in the TSA. They can go through your stuff. I mean, to my mind, as far as I know, none of this stuff was a law, right? They didn't pass a law saying that TSA can and or should go through everybody's luggage or like randomly screen luggage. That's about managing risk. They don't have to screen everybody's luggage because it functions as a deterrent, right? This is the same like I talked about in my, I think, George Floyd video about how it annoys me the way, and this is related to Foucault and stuff too, which I'll talk about in a future video as well. But this is all like statistical calculations of possible risks. Stores do this with shoplifting. They include the anticipated cost of shoplifting every month in the cost of operations, right? And at some point, like spending time and resources trying to stop shoplifting, at some point adding money into that is more expensive than just letting the shoplifting occur, right? So there's a kind of like Laffer curve sort of phenomenon here, right? It's the same with like I said in the George Floyd video, like turnstile jumping and stuff like that. They figure that's what the TSA screening is, I assume. That they figure if they screen 30% of the luggage or whatever, then that actually has, you know, a calculable effect on the willingness of people to try to get guns through TSA or whatever. You know, things like that. And so this management of risks, this calculation of risks, etc., policy that is devised and implemented on the basis of these calculations of risk, all this happens behind closed doors. We don't see it. We don't know anything about it. We just show up at the TSA one day and they're, you know, taking people's underwear off or something. You know, I don't know what the next thing would be. You know, they're doing like rectal exams to see if you have, some kind of like a bomb in your rectum or something. I don't know. They do the full body scans. They put your stuff through X-rays. They screen some of the luggage, etc. And these are just policies that get implemented as part of the security state. You have to have a certain kind of identification, and they come about, as the TSA did, in response to an awareness of the possibility of certain risks, of vulnerabilities in the system, right? A vulnerability in the system of transportation, a vulnerability in the stock exchange produces, at the level of the security state in this administrative bureaucracy, certain cybersecurity measures and stuff like that, right? I think people don't understand how much stuff there is, like how much of all this stuff there is. How many of these agencies? So I'll try to show you some of them. Structure. See, even just Department of Homeland Security, right? People don't understand how much of this stuff there is. Like the government in such a significant amount of the government and what happens with the government, the federal government, is just like a million agencies, advisory groups, other components, etc. And these people are all doing these calculations, right? They're doing, this is one that I think Trump just created, yeah. Say Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act of 2018. You can talk about the NSA, the FBI, the CIA. There's just so much stuff. Let's just see executive branch. Can I do just like? I don't know if I can just do this. Yeah. So I mean, if you just look at all this stuff, man, it's people don't really understand like just every possible system in the United States, every every like area of our of functioning in society, all this kind of stuff. It's all constantly being researched. All the risks are being calculated, all this kind of stuff, like with the EPA or something like that too, right? They run some kind of study or something on the effects of a certain kind of new, or a certain, like if we switch to a different kind of humidifier or something, I don't know. And then they do a big study on it. They try to calculate the costs and the rewards, and then they come up with some advisement or something at the most, I think, that gets signed off on, right? Because there's so much going on. Like, this is another problem with the Agamben thing, like the complexity of life in America, of the way the government functions and everything that it covers, and of just society and the functioning of society is unimaginable. Like the lethality of individuals with the technologies that are available to us would have been unimaginable in previous societies. The complexity of our society would have been unimaginable, right? People don't, like in the Department of Defense, the joint agencies. I don't know. Do we know about the research stuff? Do you guys know about the research stuff? I think the DRD or something. I mean, I don't know. It's so as far as the security state, my point is the way that it functions is that vulnerabilities in the sort of daily operations of every sphere, every sector, every kind of activity in American life, these vulnerabilities are assessed, right? The risks that are possible there are, in some sense, calculated, and policies get implemented by agents, mostly agencies that are unaccountable. We don't know about them. We don't know why they're making the decisions that they do. And we just sort of, show up at the TSA one day and they're doing full body screening. you know. And if you don't think like the stuff I was showing you with like Operation Shamrock and stuff like that, if you don't think that, similar to the Virilio thing about the accidents are produced by technological innovations, or we could talk about it in terms of Toynbee, right? In my video on Toynbee, the etherealization idea. As our civilization advances and it undergoes this process of etherealization, as technology develops and etherealizes, like communications, for example. When communications becomes, like when you're mailing, when everyone's engaged in the post, right? They mail, physical mail. Like it's actually very difficult to, they had to like scan copies of everything, right, and send them, and a person had to sit there and sort of go through them, and they'd have crates of photos or whatever. You have to have a lot of personnel to do it. And in an age where we have like stuff like facial recognition software and satellites everywhere, cameras all over the streets, everywhere you go, you shop, you use a credit card, like everything exists in sort of digital space. So when you have an etherealization of communications or whatever, the possibility for surveillance, to have this sort of massive surveillance dragnet, right, where everything that happens in society is being, to some degree, monitored, surveilled, at least stored, right, in some kind of digital archive that's searchable. I don't know if you've seen, like, I think there are, like, helicopters flying over major cities like Chicago or something, and they just fly over recording everything, and then if there's, like, a murder, right, they can just, like, reverse the tape, look at the house, see the car that left, and just go track them down, Like, we're all constantly being surveilled. All of our data is collected. If you don't think that they're doing stuff like Operation Shamrock still, I think that you're insane, right? But I also think that somebody like Agamben is naive to imagine either that we could have a society where we don't do that, or that like there aren't real risks, right, that generate to some degree, like there may be excesses or whatever, but if you don't have this massive counterintelligence network, if you don't have the cybersecurity network, if you don't have this counterterrorism, you don't have the Department of Homeland Security, all this kind of stuff, the amount of like catastrophic events would be much greater, obviously. So I don't know, it's kind of back and forth for me, but yeah, there's the surveillance issue. Everything's being surveyed. Everyone's being surveilled. We have, satellite imaging of where people are. You can see this even in terms of like looking, in like caves in Afghanistan for bin Laden or something. We have access to that kind of thing. I don't know if you guys know, but I think under Obama, right, we had the first drone assassination of of an American citizen. Yeah, al-Awlaki. Like, and this guy, my guess, I don't know a lot about him. Oh, an American boy, even. Okay, so anyway, kill lists, we have no-fly lists, we have, red flag, all this kind of stuff. All this data is being collected on everybody all the time. We're all being surveilled. We're all being monitored. It's a surveillance state, but it's also a security state, which I think means trying to manage these risks, right? Administering civic life such that these risks are managed. And there are real risks, right? But, you wind up with a system which has all this totalitarian potential like Agamben's talking about, If we're all being surveilled all the time and then the U.S. decides that you're crappy or whatever, boom, you become the first U.S. citizen to be targeted and killed by a U.S. drone strike. Without the rights of due process being afforded. That's what happens to you. You don't have a trial. You get, they decide that you're some kind of serious threat. You're designated a terrorist. You're detained without charge indefinitely. There's just, I don't know how you get around it really, but I understand that there's an immense sort of totalitarian danger inherent to this kind of system. I just don't know how you have a country without that kind of system. Because the risks are real. Like if we have a major shortage of food or something like that, like the security state apparatus has run through those scenarios. It has determined, the sort of worst case scenario outcome of a major shortage. Some disease hits all the livestock or something like that, or all the grains or whatever, right? They've calculated worst case scenarios for that. They've gone through, the simulations, and they've determined like the moves that would be necessary in order to provide sort of maximum security in the case of these worst case scenarios. Like all of these agencies and bureaus are, they're running through simulations of everything, all the time, with all the information in the world on everyone and every place in the country, basically. I think the security state is very real, and it's important to understand. But yeah, I figured in this video I would just sort of riff on it. I hope that was interesting. I probably forgot some things. I had kind of some ideas in my head of what I wanted to talk about or whatever. I think I mostly talked about them. Maybe not. Maybe I forgot some things, but I think this is interesting stuff, and it's important to think about, and it's important to be critical of, and to think about like where the limits should be, maybe alternative possibilities in some particular cases or whatever. And it's important, of course, in my mind, understanding everything is important. So it's important for me to understand the security state, the idea of the security state. Just in and of itself, it's important to understand it. So you should too, It's interesting stuff. You can explore more on your own or whatever. But I think sovereignty is possessed by this, administrative bureaucracy. There's remarkable retention, right? The U.S., we'll get a new president, right? And basically all the policy in the country remains the same. We get basically no policy change when we go from one president to the next, to the next, to the next, because there's just this kind of bureaucratic inertia in the administrative bureaucracy, and they're running the country, They're managing all the risks. They're a kind of permanent second government, They're a deep state. They're running things. They're managing things. They constitute a security state. They constitute a surveillance state. We're all being monitored, and systems are being secured against the possibility of various risks, and that invariably is going to involve, I think, oversteps, and it's definitely frightening, and there's certainly an enormous totalitarian danger that does, vastly exceed, just because of the technologies that we possess, anything that the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany would have been able to ever do. The amount of data that is collected just by Facebook every day on the country probably exceeds the total amount of information on the population, ever possessed, combined over the years by the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or something, right? It's unbelievable. But anyway, that's some about the security state. Hope that was fairly interesting. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to do the same thing and sort of riff on the idea of the biosecurity state. I hope you'll tune in for that too. Remember, don't simply react, but think culture.